I pulled into my driveway at 8:58 p.m., bone-tired, shirt plastered to my back, the kind of tired you only earn by crawling through 130-degree attics all day. The van idled, air conditioning still blasting, tools rattling in that familiar knock-and-click rhythm. I'd just saved a family's AC from giving up during an Arizona heat wave, and I was thinking about a cold shower and leftover meatloaf. Not drama, not flashing lights. The first cruiser eased around the corner like a shark fin. Then, the second. By the time the third slid to a stop, my quiet street in Willow Creek looked like a crime scene. Red and blue washed over the stucco, over the sagging oleanders and the dusty mailbox I kept meaning to fix. Doors opened, radios crackled. A deputy's voice boomed through the night, firm and practiced. "Sir, step away from the vehicle, hands where we can see them. My name is Ethan Cole. I fix the machines that keep people alive out here. I've got calluses on my hands and sun-bleached hair 2 shades lighter than it used to be. I'm not a fighter. I'm not a saint. I am ordinary. Ordinary men don't expect to be told to turn around in their own driveway." "Officer, is there—" I started. "Turn around, sir." I did. Because in the dark, with neighbors peeking through blinds and 3 engines humming, you don't argue philosophy. The cuffs bit colder than I expected, then hotter, because metal learns the temperature of your skin. The deputy read something about criminal threats and ongoing violations, and I watched the vapor from my breath drift in the hot night and vanish. Across the street, Linda Prescott lifted her phone like a trophy. She framed me carefully, chin up, that practiced HOA board smile, a little pity, a little triumph. Linda was 60 going on forever, hair so blonde it glowed under the cruiser lights, designer frames, the works. I'd seen that look before when she'd cornered a teenager about a basketball hoop. Tonight, she looked like she'd caught a serial killer. "There he is," she said to whoever was watching through her live video. "Finally held accountable. After months of terrorizing this neighborhood, terrorizing." I almost laughed. Then I didn't, because the cuff on my right wrist tightened when I moved. Heat pressed down. 118 degrees at 6, maybe 104 degrees now. The asphalt still radiated. Diesel fumes from my van mixed with creosote and the faint scent of someone's overwatered rosemary. A dog barked 2 streets over, one lonely bark, then silence. Behind me, the deputy kept it professional. "Mr. Cole, you're being detained while we investigate a report. You have the right—" Linda cut across the rights I already knew by heart. "Officer, I have documentation. Multiple violations. Thousands in unpaid fines. He spit on me last week. I hadn't. And he parks that commercial eyesore right in front of his house, against aesthetic standards. Aesthetic standards. In a desert where half the lawns were gravel and the other half faked it with turf. Linda had found the one phrase that could make 3 aliens land on your cul-de-sac and ask for proof of residency. "Ma'am," the deputy said, "we'll look at everything." "Oh, you'll want to see these." She fanned a stack of papers like a Vegas dealer. Professional letterhead, case numbers, seals. She had props. Linda always had props. The beam from another flashlight swept my van door. "Sir, is this your work vehicle?" "Yes, sir. Ethan Cole, Reliable Climate Repair. It's registered—" "He's lying," Linda sang, for the benefit of the internet. "He owes over 3,000 in fines. He refuses to comply. The board has records." Neighbors trickled out in house shoes and pajama pants, summoned by light and rumor. Janet from 2 streets over stood on the sidewalk with her arms folded tight, uncertainty and anger wrestling in her face. Bob Harris, retired accountant and professional skeptic, hovered near his mailbox, eyeing the papers. Mr. and Mrs. Sanchez, good folks who always waved when I rolled out at dawn, held hands on their porch. You could feel the judgment swing back and forth, a pendulum looking for a place to rest. The deputy asked me something about where I'd been at 8 o'clock. I told him. Chandler, condenser coil, Johnson family, paperwork in the van. He nodded. He had the weary look of a man who had been called to referee a neighborhood squabble one too many times. Professional, yes, but already calculating how much of his night would be eaten by it. "Officer," Linda said, angling her phone to capture my cuffed hands. "If you need copies of the unpaid statements, I brought the originals. You'll see the totals on the bottom line. He's been ignoring certified mail." "Ma'am," the deputy repeated, patient as a desert stone, "we'll review them." She stepped close, too close, slid one of the fines to the top. An official seal winked under a street lamp. "Community Standards Processing," the letterhead read, crisp and intimidating. I knew that font now. I knew that spacing. I'd seen it before, tucked under my wiper blade like a threat that didn't need words. "May I?" the deputy asked. Of course. Linda's smile widened. She was the star witness of her own show. He held the first page up to his flashlight. I watched his eyes move left to right to left, the way a man reads when he's looking for something specific. Case numbers, violations, aesthetic standards, payment instructions, a P.O. box, terms. Then he paused. He shifted the page. He read the bottom line again. "Ma'am," he said, "who issued this?" "The board," Linda said. "As president, Who signed it?" "Officer, this is standard practice." Who signed it?" Not unkind, not loud, but it wasn't a question anymore. Her smile flickered. "It's right there." It was, clear as the desert sky. B. Prescott, same hand that held the phone, same hand that held the stack, same hand that waved to the deputy like a queen greeting subjects. "That's my maiden initial," she added quickly, as if the air itself had asked. "A formality." The deputy didn't answer. He looked at the second page, the third. Same seal, same letterhead, same signature. He lowered the stack, the weight of it suddenly different. "Sir," he said to me, "do you have any paperwork in the vehicle? Proof of your work call tonight?" "Yes, sir." Clipboard on the passenger seat. Johnson signed at 9:20. "Turner," he called to the second deputy, "grab that clipboard." Linda made a sound like a tea kettle just before it boils. "Officer, you're not seriously considering, I have more." "There were threats," I breathed finally. Slow, in, out. The cuffs still bit, but the heat shifted, from my wrists to Linda's face, which had gone a shade that doesn't exist in the paint aisle. A light flicked on behind me, my kitchen window. A cheap clock on the wall read 9:06. In the van, the blower still pushed cold air into a night that would never be cool enough. Diesel drifted. Someone coughed. Somewhere far off, a siren wailed for a reason that had nothing to do with any of us. The deputy looked at me, then at Linda, then at the papers again. He didn't say what I was thinking, but I could feel the question setting like concrete between us. What do you do when your neighbor tries to have you arrested over her own unpaid bills? Hold that thought, because to answer it, you need the beginning, the real beginning, of how a work truck, a heat wave, and one determined woman turned a quiet street into a battlefield. And how I learned, the hard way, that some fights don't start with fists. They start with paper and signatures, and a smile that never reaches the eyes. To understand how I ended up cuffed in my own driveway, you need to know where I live, and who I live near. Willow Creek Estate sounds like a postcard. In the real estate brochures, you'll see beige stucco homes lined up like teeth, palm trees swaying against wide Arizona skies, and yards dressed in artful layers of desert rock. What you don't see is the heat pressing down on everything in July, the way the wind smells like baked dust, or how sound carries at night so that a screen door 2 streets over slams like it's right behind you. I moved here 2 years ago, after my marriage ended the way most bad marriages do, quietly and then all at once. My ex-wife had champagne taste and a talent for spending money that wasn't there. When the papers were signed, I was left with the houseplants she forgot to kill, a pickup truck on its last legs, and just enough in the bank for a down payment on a modest 3-bedroom ranch. I didn't care about granite countertops or crown molding. I cared about having a garage big enough to hold my tools and a driveway where I could park my work van without playing musical chairs with street parking. My name's Ethan Cole. I'm 34. I fix air conditioners for a living. In Arizona, that's not just a job, it's a survival service. People call me when their houses have turned into ovens and they're counting the minutes before they melt. That kind of work leaves you smelling like insulation and refrigerant, with a permanent layer of sunburn no matter how much SPF you use. But it's honest work. It pays my bills, and until a certain neighbor moved in, it gave me a quiet, steady life. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, but it was predictable. Most of my neighbors were working folks or retirees who cared more about whether you'd lend them a ladder than whether your blinds matched your shutters. The HOA, Homeowners Association, had formed in 2018 mostly to keep people from letting their yards turn into car graveyards. Dues were reasonable, the rules were few, and nobody seemed to have the appetite for enforcing them too strictly. Then came Linda Prescott. She moved in about 6 months after me, sliding into the neighborhood like a storm front. Late 50s, bleached blonde bob that probably owed its survival to a monthly appointment and industrial-strength hairspray. Big sunglasses you could land a helicopter on. She drove a silver Mercedes C-Class that she polished twice a week, like it was a religious ritual. I learned the backstory in pieces, the way gossip floats around a cul-de-sac. Linda and her husband had lived in Scottsdale, in one of those gated golf course communities, where the carts cost more than my van. His import business tanked, hard, and left them in a crater of debt. The Scottsdale house went first, then the vacations. Then, apparently, the marriage. By the time Linda landed in Willow Creek, she was driving a leased Mercedes she could barely afford, and looking at our working-class neighborhood like she'd been banished to the far side of the moon. From the start, she carried herself like she was still holding court at the country club. She'd sweep through HOA meetings with folders and agendas like we were the board of a Fortune 500 company, instead of a handful of neighbors in folding chairs. She talked about aesthetic standards and preserving property values, the way a preacher talks about sin and redemption. I tried to stay polite. I nodded when she waved from her driveway. But there was something in the way her eyes scanned my van, the way her mouth pinched when I came home late from a job, that told me I was already on her mental list of problems to solve, and maybe I should have seen it coming. Because the first real sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning, not long after she moved in. I'd pulled a late-night emergency call, didn't roll in until almost 1 a.m. The next morning, there was a folded paper tucked under my windshield wiper, crisp as if it had just been printed. The words "commercial vehicle storage violation" sat at the top in bold letters, with an official-looking seal in the corner. Fine amount, $75, payment due in 14 days. It had that kind of professional polish that makes you believe it's real before you've even read the fine print. But I did read it, twice, and something didn't add up. The violation code didn't match anything in the HOA's bylaws, and the payment instructions, well, let's just say they were unusual enough to plant a seed in my mind. That was the first moment I realized Willow Creek Estates wasn't the sleepy, well-mannered neighborhood I'd thought it was. And that Linda Prescott wasn't just another neighbor. She was a problem waiting to happen. And I was parked right in her line of sight. I stood there in the morning heat, the paper in my hand already softening from sweat, the words "commercial vehicle storage violation" glaring at me like a neon sign. My van sat in the driveway, the name "Reliable Climate Repair" painted cleanly on the side, ladder racks gleaming from a recent scrub. It was ridiculous. I'd parked it in that exact spot every night since I moved in, and not once had anyone said a word, but now, in bold letters, the HOA, or so it claimed, was telling me I owed $75 for the privilege. I went inside, poured a mug of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table. The desert sun was already pushing through the blinds, painting strips of light across the wood. I read the notice again and again. The seal in the corner looked official, but the font was off. The case number didn't match the format I'd seen in my welcome packet when I bought the house. And the payment instructions, mail a check to Community Standards Processing at a P.O. box in Phoenix, were vague enough to make my gut itch. I took the advice my father drilled into me years ago. If something smells wrong, check the source. I called the HOA's property management company during my lunch break, the phone tucked between my ear and shoulder while I swapped out a burned capacitor for a customer. A woman named Sandra answered, her voice the kind of polite that comes from years of dealing with angry homeowners. "Sandra," I said, "I've got a question about a violation notice I received this morning. Citation number 20-318B. Can you tell me what that's for?" There was a pause. Not long, but long enough to tell me something was off. "Sir," she said slowly, "we haven't issued any violations this week." I read the citation number again, letter for letter. She checked her system. No match, she said. And for the record, our bylaws don't prohibit commercial vehicles in driveways. We've had contractors here for years. That was the moment my coffee and sunrise morning shifted into something else entirely. When I hung up, I went to the hall closet and pulled out the thick stack of HOA documents I'd initialed on closing day, the same ones every homeowner skims because they just want the keys. I flipped through page after page of restrictions, landscaping rules, noise ordinances, nothing about work trucks, commercial logos, or anything remotely connected to how I earned my living, which meant that violation wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was fake, completely fabricated. Now, most people would crumple the paper, toss it, and hope it never came back. But I'd been through a divorce that taught me a different lesson. Always keep the paper trail. If someone tries to hit you with official-looking nonsense, demand to see the originals. Make them prove it's real. That night, I slid the violation into a manila folder and labeled it Prescott, Possible Fraud. It was the first page of what would eventually become a mountain of evidence. The next morning, I decided to test a theory. I parked the van exactly where it had been before, logo side facing the street. If Linda Prescott was behind this, I wanted to see how fast she'd bite. I didn't have to wait long. At 7:15 a.m., I caught the flash of her silver Mercedes in my peripheral vision. She was idling at the curb, phone in hand, aimed at my driveway like a paparazzo chasing a celebrity scandal. She tapped at the screen a few times, lowered the window just enough to toss me a smile that wasn't a smile at all, and drove off. 2 days later, another notice appeared. Same seal, same P.O. box, different violation code. This time, aesthetic standards violation, noise and disturbance. Fine, 50. There was no mistaking it now. Linda wasn't just pushing some HOA guideline, she was manufacturing violations from scratch. And if she was doing it to me, odds were I wasn't her only target. I held the new notice up to the morning sun. The watermark was faint, but there. Same printer, same paper stock. A match. She was careful. I'll give her that. But careful only works if the person you're targeting doesn't fight back. And me? I've never been very good at letting things slide. Somewhere between the smell of coffee and the sound of my van cooling in the driveway, I made a decision. I was going to find out exactly how deep Linda Prescott's little operation went. And when I did, I'd make sure everyone in Willow Creek knew it. 3 days after that second violation, I came home from a late service call to find a folded sheet of paper taped right to my front door, not tucked politely in the mailbox, slapped there like a scarlet letter. In big block letters at the top, Emergency HOA Board Meeting, Thursday 7 p.m., Community Center, topic. Ongoing violations by homeowner Ethan Cole, emergency. Like I'd set fire to the neighborhood or was running a dogfighting ring in my garage. I'd lived here for barely 3 months, and the most exciting thing that had happened before this was Mr. Donnelly's cat getting stuck on a roof. The meeting night, the sky was the color of faded denim, and the air still hung thick from the day's heat. The community center sat at the edge of the neighborhood, a beige box with a squeaky glass door and the faint smell of industrial cleaner, like a high school gym after a losing season. When I stepped inside, I expected maybe the 5 board members, a couple of curious neighbors, and Linda in her usual front row spot. Instead, it looked like a tribunal. Folding chairs filled every corner. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their flicker making the whole place feel like a low-budget interrogation room. At the head table sat Jerry Wallace, the HOA president, a retired insurance adjuster who treated Robert's rules of order like scripture. To his right was Linda Prescott, wearing a coral blazer that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage and clutching a manila folder thick enough to stop a bullet. Her knee bounced under the table like she'd had 3 too many espressos. Jerry cleared his throat. We're here tonight to address ongoing violations and disruptive behavior by Mr. Cole. Linda was on her feet before he finished, flipping her folder open with the flair of a stage magician. He's been parking that commercial vehicle in clear violation of our aesthetic standards for weeks, she announced, voice pitched high enough to hit the back wall. And the noise, coming home at all hours, slamming doors, revving engines. Mrs. Evans can attest to his aggressive behavior. She laid out printed violation notices, complaint forms, and what looked suspiciously like a petition with a dozen shaky signatures. She spread them across the table like a prosecutor showing off exhibits. I waited until she was in full stride before standing, a slim folder in my hand. Before we continue, I'd like to see the specific bylaw that defines these aesthetic standards for commercial vehicles. Jerry frowned, flipping through his own copy of the HOA rules. Well, there's the general provision about maintaining property values. Right, I said. But what exactly does it say about work trucks? Silence, the kind you can feel in your teeth. The air conditioning kicked on with a wheeze that made me want to hand Jerry my business card. I pulled out my phone. While we're at it, here are photos I took today of actual violations. I held the screen up. Linda's driveway, cracked like a dry riverbed. Her front yard, dotted with dead plants still in plastic pots from Home Depot. My personal favorite, her mailbox hanging off its post at a 45-degree angle, looking like it had survived a minor explosion. If we're talking aesthetic standards, I said, maybe we should start with these. The room shifted. People leaned in. A couple of chuckles floated from the back. That's completely different, Linda snapped, color rising in her cheeks. This is about your behavior. Ma'am, Jerry cut in, his tone sharpening. Do you have documentation that Mr. Cole has violated any specific bylaw? Linda's mouth opened, closed. Then, from the end of the table, Margaret Evans, 78 years old, sweet as pie, spoke up in a voice that barely carried. I just signed what she asked me to, she said, twisting her purse strap in her hands. She told me Ethan was probably dealing drugs, but I've never seen anything suspicious. He's always been polite. I think she just doesn't like working people. It was like someone had dropped a stone into a still pond. The ripples hit every corner of the room. Linda's expression went tight. Jerry looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. He called a recess, the board huddling in the corner, whispering like they were plotting a coup. When they returned, Jerry cleared his throat. Due to procedural irregularities, we're tabling this matter pending further review. I thought that might be the end of it. But as we filed out, Linda cornered Jerry near the door. I caught just enough to hear her suggest a $25 monthly monitoring fee for my property until my compliance could be verified. $25, not much, but the principle, that was war. Walking back to my van, the desert air carried the scent of sage and the acrid tang of whatever they used to scrub the community center floors. Behind me, Margaret caught up, her shoes crunching on the gravel. I'm sorry, she said quietly. She made it sound like you were dangerous. I should have known better. I told her not to worry, but inside, I knew the truth. This wasn't over. Linda Prescott had tasted blood, and she wasn't the type to spit it out. 2 weeks. That's how long it took Linda Prescott to make her next move. It was a Saturday morning, one of those rare Arizona mornings when the heat hasn't quite crawled into your bones yet. I was under the hood of my van, replacing a belt that had been squealing like a bad violin, when a White County pickup rolled up to the curb. On the door, Maricopa County Code Enforcement. The driver stepped out, a tall guy in a polo shirt and khaki pants, clipboard in hand. The kind of man who looks like he's spent his career explaining regulations to people who don't want to hear them. Mr. Cole, he asked, scanning the clipboard. That's me, I said, wiping my hands on a rag that had seen better decades. Inspector Tom Davidson. We've received a complaint that you're operating an unlicensed commercial business from this residential property. I raised an eyebrow. What kind of business are we talking about? He glanced at his paperwork. Unlicensed HVAC repair operation, commercial equipment storage, customer vehicles regularly on the property, excessive noise from power tools, possible hazardous materials storage. I looked around. My driveway was empty except for the van I was working on. Garage door open, inside, a lawnmower, a couple of toolboxes, and an old fishing rod I never used. Where exactly are these customer vehicles and hazardous materials? I asked. That's what I'm here to investigate. He walked the property, snapping photos, peering into corners like he expected to find barrels of toxic waste stacked behind the barbecue grill. After 20 minutes, the look on his face shifted from professional to annoyed. Mr. Cole, he said finally, there's no evidence of any commercial activity here beyond your own vehicle. Filing false reports with code enforcement is a Class 1 misdemeanor in this county. Someone's wasting taxpayer resources. I didn't even have to guess who that someone was. From where I stood, I could see Linda's silver Mercedes parked 3 doors down. Curtains in her front window twitched just enough to catch the sunlight. Davidson closed his clipboard with a snap. I'm going to flag this address. Any future complaints will be reviewed for credibility before we take action. As he drove away, I realized something important. Linda had just made her first real mistake. By dragging county code enforcement into her little crusade, she'd created an official paper trail. From here on out, every false complaint she filed was going to be logged, time-stamped, and traceable. That afternoon, I took a slow walk around the neighborhood, phone camera in hand. I wasn't looking for trouble. I was looking for a pattern. And what I found made my stomach tighten. Janet Moore, 2 streets over, showed me a $150 fine for unauthorized landscaping modifications. Her crime? Planting tomatoes in her backyard. Bob Harris had a $200 fine for replacing his warped front door with the exact same model. The violation? Architectural modifications without board approval. And Lisa Bennett, single mom, works nights, confessed she'd actually paid one of the fines. $75 mailed to a P.O. box in Phoenix. The company name? Community Standards Processing, LLC. I didn't need a degree in accounting to connect the dots. Linda Prescott wasn't just making life miserable for people she didn't like. She was running a scam, one that was putting real money in her pocket. And now, thanks to Inspector Davidson's visit, she'd handed me the first breadcrumb in a trail that was going to lead her straight into the kind of trouble you can't talk your way out of. Sunday afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with 3 manila folders spread out in front of me, my 2 bogus violations and the photos I'd taken of Linda's cracked driveway, dead plants, and leaning mailbox. The house was quiet except for the low hum of my refrigerator. Outside, cicadas buzzed in the heat like some endless electric current. I'd been turning one question over in my mind since Inspector Davidson's visit. How many people has she hit with this scam? The only way to find out was to knock on doors. First stop was Janet Moore's place, 2 streets over, cream-colored stucco, front porch draped in wind chimes. She poured us both iced tea and laid a $150 violation notice on her kitchen counter. Unauthorized landscaping modifications, she read aloud, rolling her eyes. That's what they called planting tomatoes. In my backyard, I didn't even know the HOA cared about vegetable gardens. The letterhead was identical to mine, Community Standards Processing, LLC. The case number format matched, and at the bottom, payment instructions to a Phoenix P.O. box. I took photos. Janet waved her hand. I knew it was nonsense, so I ignored it. But my neighbor 2 doors down, single mom, she paid 1. Which led me to Lisa Bennett. Lisa's small stucco house sat on a corner lot. A kid's bicycle leaned against the porch railing. She looked nervous answering the door, like she expected bad news. But when I told her I was asking about HOA violations, she relaxed, just a little, and invited me in. She pulled an envelope from a drawer. It was $75. I just didn't want trouble, so I mailed the check. The payee line read, Community Standards Processing, LLC. And in the corner of the deposit stamp on the back, so faint I almost missed it, were the initials B, Prescott. That was the smoking gun. Bob Harris was my last stop. Retired accountant, neighborhood watchdog, and the kind of man who alphabetizes his spice rack. He didn't just have his own violation notice, he had a spreadsheet. 14 households, Bob said, tapping the screen of his laptop. 47 separate fines over the past 18 months. Total attempted collections, 30,000, 7 of them actually paid, 1,000 total, all to that same P.O. box. He swiveled the laptop so I could see the pattern. Dates, addresses, amounts, payment methods, all neatly lined up. This isn't just harassment, Bob said. It's mail fraud, possibly wire fraud, depending on how she's handling the payments. And if she's using a fake company name, identity theft's on the table too. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the neat columns of numbers. I could practically see the trail of checks and deposits winding straight into Linda's bank account. The heat outside pressed against the windows, but it wasn't the weather making my pulse tick faster. Linda Prescott hadn't just picked a fight with me. She'd built a criminal enterprise right under the noses of her neighbors, counting on them being too embarrassed or too intimidated to push back. But now Now she'd given me all the ammunition I needed to blow the whole thing wide open. It was just past 9 p.m. when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I'd been half watching a documentary about Route 6, sipping a cold beer, still thinking about Bob's spreadsheet and that P.O. box. The text came from an unknown number. Your employer has been contacted about your illegal business activities. Stop harassing senior residents or there will be serious consequences. I stared at it for a moment, letting the words settle. Then I read it again, slower this time, my jaw tightening. This wasn't subtle HOA nonsense anymore. This was personal. I stepped out onto the back patio, the desert night wrapping around me, warm, dry, the faint scent of sage drifting on the breeze. Across the street, 3 doors down, the silhouette of Linda's house was outlined against the glow of a living room lamp. Her silver Mercedes sat in the driveway, gleaming even under the streetlight. And unless my eyes were playing tricks on me, one of her curtains twitched ever so slightly. I knew she was watching, waiting for me to react. Instead, I went back inside, grabbed my phone, and took a screenshot of the message. I filed it in a new folder I'd just created earlier that day. Prescott, threats. Then I printed it. Paper was harder to accidentally delete. See, my divorce had taught me one very expensive lesson. When someone plays dirty, you document everything. That night, I dug an old spiral-bound notebook out of the drawer and started writing. Dates, times, the exact wording of every violation notice. Descriptions of every face-to-face encounter, notes on who was present, the smell in the air, the way her tone shifted when she thought she was winning. This was no longer about proving my innocence. This was about building a case. I spent the next 2 days walking the neighborhood, not just chatting with people, but collecting stories. I carried my phone for photos and a small audio recorder for when someone was willing to speak on the record. Janet told me Linda had shown up at her door unannounced with a folder of evidence against me, insisting she sign a complaint. Lisa admitted she'd received a second warning after paying her first bogus fine, suggesting the payment had only marked her as an easy target. Every story added another piece to the puzzle. Every name was another witness. By the time I got back to my kitchen table on Wednesday night, the manila folder labeled Prescott was too thick to close. Inside it was everything. Photos, violation letters, texts, a printout of Bob's spreadsheet, and now a written log of my own. The text message had been meant to scare me into backing down. Instead, it had done the opposite. Because now, I wasn't just a guy defending himself against a petty neighbor. I was the one collecting the ammunition. And sooner or later, Linda Prescott was going to find out exactly what it feels like when someone points it all right back at you. By Friday evening, the August heat had finally started to loosen its grip, and the neighborhood was settling into that rare quiet between dinner and the nightly dog walks. I was in the garage, organizing my tool racks, when I heard footsteps on the driveway. It was Bob Harris, wearing his usual khaki shorts and a faded Cubs cap, holding a thick folder under one arm. Behind him was Janet Moore, carrying a plastic pitcher of iced tea like it was her peace offering. "We need to talk," Bob said without preamble. We gathered around my workbench, the smell of motor oil and sun-warmed concrete hanging in the air. Bob set the folder down and opened it to reveal not just his spreadsheet, but printed bank records, highlighted, tabbed, and organized with accountant-level precision. "I called in a favor," he said. "My nephew works in compliance for a regional bank. He can't pull everything without a warrant, but he confirmed deposits to that P.O. box account, 7 in the last 6 months. All checks made out to Community Standards Processing, every single one endorsed by a B. Prescott." Janet leaned in. "That's it, Ethan. That's your smoking gun." I shook my head. "It's our smoking gun. She's hit too many of us. If we go after her, we do it together." That's when Lisa Bennett walked in, uninvited but welcome, her 8-year-old son trailing behind with a popsicle. She must have overheard us because she pulled a folded letter from her bag. "She just sent me this," Lisa said, voice shaking. "A new final warning for 100, and if I don't pay, she says the HOA will put a lien on my house." Bob frowned. "She can't do that without board approval, and I'd bet my pension she didn't get it." We talked for over an hour, hashing out what we knew, what we could prove, and what we suspected but couldn't touch yet. I laid out the notes and photos I'd been collecting, plus the text message thread. Janet offered to knock on a few more doors to see if there were victims we hadn't found. Lisa said she'd talked to her cousin, who worked for a local news station. By the time we were done, the sun had set, and the garage was lit only by the single bulb above my bench. But something had changed in that dim light. This wasn't just my fight anymore. We agreed to form a sort of neighborhood task force. Bob would handle the paper trail, Janet would gather witness statements, and I'd coordinate everything into one airtight package we could take to law enforcement. As they left, Janet put a hand on my arm. "She's not going to stop, Ethan. People like her never do, not until someone forces them." I watched them disappear into the shadows of the cul-de-sac. Somewhere behind a curtained window, I knew Linda was watching too, probably wondering why her targets were suddenly meeting in garages instead of hiding in their homes. Let her wonder, because now, this wasn't a feud. It was an alliance, and Linda Prescott had just made the mistake of uniting her enemies. The first shot came on a Tuesday morning. I was halfway through replacing a compressor for a customer across town when my phone buzzed. The number was local, but not one I recognized. "Mr. Cole, this is Officer Ramirez with the Willow Creek Police Department. We've received a report that you threatened a neighbor during a confrontation last night. Are you able to come down to the station to give a statement?" For a second, the words didn't even register. Threatened? Confrontation? Last night? I'd spent all of Monday evening in Mesa, fixing a restaurant's walk-in cooler until nearly midnight. "Officer, I wasn't even home last night," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I've got the work order and security footage to prove it." There was a pause. "Footage?" "Yes. The restaurant has cameras in the kitchen. You can see me in there from 6:15 p.m. until I clock out at 11:47 p.m. I signed the job sheet. The manager can confirm." I could almost hear the change in his tone. Less suspicious now, more curious. "All right, why don't you bring that documentation in this afternoon? We'll add it to the file." When I hung up, I didn't need a psychic to know who had filed that report. By 3 o'clock, I was sitting in a small interview room at the station, a cup of burnt coffee cooling at my elbow. Officer Ramirez clicked his pen as I handed over the printouts. Time-stamped security stills, the signed job order, even a copy of my gas receipt from a station halfway between the restaurant and home. "This," he said, tapping the stack, "is about as airtight as it gets. I'll be honest, Mr. Cole, this is the third complaint in 2 months we've gotten from the same party about you. None of them have panned out." He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. "Does that mean I can file something back?" I asked. Ramirez nodded slowly. "If you believe these reports are intentionally false, that's filing a false police report. Class 1 misdemeanor. But I'd suggest you keep documenting. The more we have, the easier it'll be for the DA to take it seriously if this escalates." Escalates. The word stuck in my head like a splinter. When I left the station, the sun was dipping low, painting the asphalt in long orange shadows. I drove straight to Bob's place. He listened quietly as I told him what happened, then slid a fresh sheet of paper across the table. "Add it to the log," he said. "Date, time, nature of complaint, your proof. Every single one. If we're lucky, she'll hang herself with the paper trail." That night, I scanned everything and filed it into the Prescott Threats folder, now thick enough to make the class bulge. I also made 3 digital backups, one on my work laptop, one on a flash drive I'd stash at Bob's, and one on a cloud server she'd never know existed. Linda thought she'd catch me off guard. She thought one well-timed lie would rattle me into backing down. But all she'd done was hand me another documented, time-stamped example of exactly what she was capable of. And the more she tried to corner me, the more rope she was giving me to tie the noose. By the second week of September, our little task force, Tugur, had turned into something bigger than any of us expected. What started as a few folders in my garage was now a wall of evidence spread across Bob Harris's dining room. Letters, spreadsheets, photographs, bank deposit slips, witness statements, and a growing stack of printed text messages. It was Janet who finally said what we'd all been thinking. "We've got enough to bury her in court, but maybe we don't have to wait that long." Lisa leaned forward. "You mean go public?" Bob rubbed his chin. "Careful. Defamation laws can bite you if you make claims you can't prove." I tapped the folder with Lisa's 100 final warning letter. "We can prove this. We've got matching documents, matching deposit records, and at least 7 people willing to testify on record, plus that text message threat to me, the false police report, and the code enforcement complaint. Janet's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. So, we package it up and send it somewhere she can't spin it, local media. 2 days later, I sat in a quiet corner booth at a diner off Main Street, across from a reporter named Sarah Donnelly from Channel 8 News, mid-30s, sharp brown eyes, the kind of presence that makes people spill secrets before they realize it. I slid a flash drive across the table. Everything's on there: letters, dates, names, amounts, even the bank confirmation Bob's nephew pulled. You'll find it all ties back to one person, Linda Prescott. Sarah didn't touch her coffee. If I run this, it's going to get ugly. She'll deny it, maybe even sue. Are you ready for that? I met her gaze. I've been ready since the first fake violation showed up on my windshield. The story aired the following Wednesday at 6 p.m. sharp. Local HOA board member accused of fraud. Harassment flashed across the screen, followed by footage of our neighborhood, interviews with Janet and Lisa, faces blurred at their request, and graphics showing the paper trail from homeowners' checks to Linda's account. They even played a clip of Inspector Davidson confirming he'd received a false complaint against me, with a warning that repeated misuse of county resources was a criminal offense. By the next morning, the story had blown up. Neighbors I'd never spoken to were stopping me on the street, telling me about mysterious fines they'd gotten and tossed. Someone started a Facebook group called Willow Creek Truth, and within 48 hours, it had over 120 members, more than half the neighborhood. Linda's reaction was predictable. She posted a rambling all-caps statement on Nextdoor, claiming she was the victim of a smear campaign orchestrated by disgruntled residents with personal vendettas. She called the Channel 8 piece fake news and hinted at pending legal action. But the damage was done. Now her name was public. Her face was on the 6 o'clock news. And instead of quietly targeting people one by one, she was facing an entire community that suddenly realized they'd all been played. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I felt like we were the ones holding the cards. The Friday after the Channel 8 story aired, the neighborhood was buzzing like a kicked hornet's nest. People were outside talking in driveways, sharing screenshots of the news clip, and for the first time since I'd moved in, I noticed Linda's curtains were drawn tight all day. No Mercedes runs to the nail salon, no early morning inspection walks. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd crawl into her shell and wait for the storm to pass. I was wrong. Saturday morning, I woke to a hard knock at the door. 2 Willow Creek officers stood on my porch, hands resting casually on their belts. "Mr. Cole," one said, "we've had a noise complaint from your neighbor. Reports of loud mechanical work at 3 a.m. I almost laughed. "Officers, my van hasn't moved since Thursday, and unless my tools learned how to work themselves, that's impossible." They were polite, but I could see in their eyes they already knew it was bogus. "We're required to log the complaint," the taller one said, "but this is the 5th in 3 weeks, just so you know." By noon, it escalated. Janet called, panic in her voice. She filed a report with Child Protective Services against Lisa, claims her son's being left alone at night while she parties. They showed up at her door an hour ago. Lisa was crying when we got there, clutching her boy like someone was trying to take him away. The CPS worker, a tired-looking woman with a clipboard, told us off the record she'd seen this tactic before, weaponizing the system to scare people. We all knew exactly who was behind it, but Linda wasn't done. That evening, someone slashed the rear tires on my van. Not one, both. Clean cuts, no mistaking it for road wear. I called it in, filed the report, and added it to my ever-growing Prescott threats folder. Sunday, she took it digital. The Willow Creek Truth Facebook group lit up with screenshots of posts from a brand new account under the name Concerned Resident AZ. The posts accused me of being a scammer who preyed on elderly neighbors for home repair jobs that were never finished. She claimed Bob had forged documents to frame her and hinted that Janet was mentally unstable and on medication. The comments section didn't go the way she'd hoped. Dozens of residents called out the lies, some sharing their own stories of her harassment, but I could see the desperation bleeding through every post she made. Linda was cornered, and she knew it. That night, just before midnight, my Ring camera caught her silver Mercedes creeping down the street with its headlights off. She stopped at Bob's mailbox, pulled something from her purse, and stuffed it inside before driving off. Bob found it the next morning, a single envelope with a typed note: "Stop now, or you'll regret it." He didn't hesitate. He called Detective Rodriguez, the one Sarah Donnelly from Channel 8 had put us in touch with after the story ran. Within hours, Rodriguez was at Bob's dining table, flipping through our binders of evidence with the calm focus of a man who already smelled blood in the water. "This," he said finally, tapping the stack of false violation letters, "is more than enough for probable cause, but I'm going to need one last piece before we move in. Something that connects her directly to every part of the scam in one shot." I leaned forward. "What's that?" He looked up. "We need her making a move, on camera, and we need it soon, before she figures out just how much trouble she's in." The room went still. Because we all knew, with the way Linda Prescott was unraveling, that move was coming any day now. Detective Rodriguez didn't have to wait long. 3 nights after that meeting in Bob's dining room, Linda Prescott delivered exactly what he'd been hoping for. We'd set it up carefully. 3 Ring cameras covering my driveway, front porch, and the mailbox at the curb. Bob had one pointing directly at the street from across the way. Janet volunteered to keep watch from her front window, pretending to fold laundry whenever Linda's Mercedes rolled by. It was just past 11 p.m. when my phone pinged with a motion alert. I swiped it open and saw her, hair pulled back tight, dark jacket, glancing over her shoulder as she walked up my driveway. In her hand was a crisp white envelope. She bent, slid it under my doormat, and walked away fast. The next morning, I put on gloves, picked it up, and slipped it into a clear plastic sleeve. Inside was a fake HOA violation. Improper use of property. 50 fine. Same bogus letterhead, same P.O. box, same demand for payment to Community Standards Processing LLC, but this one had something new. A Post-it note stuck to the back with a handwritten message: "Last chance, Ethan." Rodriguez's face lit up when he saw the footage and the note. That's direct delivery, no mail fraud loopholes, and with her handwriting, that ties her to every piece of this. By Wednesday, the warrants were signed. The following Friday morning, the calm of Willow Creek was shattered by the sight of 2 unmarked SUVs and a patrol car pulling up in front of Linda's house. She came out in a robe, yelling about conspiracies and harassment as they cuffed her on the porch. The whole neighborhood watched from behind curtains and half-open blinds. Bob filmed it from his lawn, and within an hour, the clip was circulating in Willow Creek Truth. The charges were a laundry list: mail fraud, wire fraud, filing false police reports, harassment, identity theft, and conspiracy. They even tacked on misuse of county resources for the bogus code enforcement calls. The trial came 6 months later. By then, we'd each testified, the Channel 8 coverage had gone statewide, and the DA's office had built a case so airtight even Linda's high-priced attorney couldn't poke holes in it. She took a plea deal, 8 years in prison, full restitution to every victim, and a lifetime ban from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. When the sentence was read, I didn't feel the rush of triumph I thought I would. What I felt was relief, deep, quiet, bone-level relief that it was over. The months that followed changed Willow Creek. We voted in a new HOA board, Bob as treasurer, Janet as vice president, Lisa heading the community events committee. We rewrote the bylaws to make scams like Linda's impossible, added a fraud reporting hotline, and opened every financial record to residents. For me, business boomed. Word of mouth traveled faster than any ad campaign. And while I never wanted to be that guy from the news forever, people knew I wouldn't back down from a fight. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about the first fake violation Linda left on my windshield, and how she must have smirked as she walked away. She thought she'd picked an easy target, a guy too busy turning wrenches to notice he was being played. Instead, she'd handed me the first thread in a rope I'd spend months weaving, until the day I wrapped it around her whole operation and pulled. And in the end, that rope is what dragged her out into the daylight, where everyone could finally see her for what she was.